Welcome back. In this video, we will go over the anatomy of the humerus. The humerus is the bone in the arm. It is a long bone in shape. It has two ends and a shaft. We have two humerus in the body. The proximal end of the humerus articulates with the scapula. This articulation forms the shoulder joint, whereas the distal end of the humerus articulates with the two bones in the forearm, the ulna, which is the medial bone, and the radius, which is the lateral bone. This articulation forms the elbow joint. Notice on this side of the model, this represents the correct anatomical position of the upper extremity. So that is the anterior aspect. This is the posterior aspect. Right here we can see how the radius is the lateral bone and the ulna is the medial bone in the anatomical position. Before we start with the structures on the humerus, first let's identify the four anatomical surfaces of the humerus. This right here is the anterior surface. You can pick any unique structure that guides you to that surface. For example, I can see on the anterior surface that we have two fossas right here. By this, I know this is the anterior surface. This will be the posterior surface. On the posterior surface, I can see only one fossa. This right here is the medial aspect of the bone. The head of the humerus will always guide me toward the medial aspect. Why? Because the head of the humerus, it has to face medially so that it articulates with the glenoid cavity on the scapula. You can't have the head facing lateral. It won't articulate. So this is the medial aspect, then this is the lateral aspect. Starting with the structures on the proximal end of the humerus. First, right here we have the head of the humerus, which looks like half a ball. Right under the head, we have the anatomical neck right here. Also, we have the surgical neck right here. It is called the surgical neck because at this point, the humerus has a higher tendency to fracture, and as a result, it became the focus of surgeons. Moving to the two tubercles of the humerus. Right here, we have the lesser tubercle, which is smaller in size than the greater tubercle right here. In between the two tubercles, we have the intertubercular sulcus. Inter means in between, intra means inside. Tubercular sulcus, also called the bicipital groove, because it is related to the biceps long head. Moving to the shaft of the humerus, right here we have the deltoid tuberosity. This is where the deltoid muscle is attached. Also, right here we have the radial groove. Moving to the distal end of the humerus. First, let's go over the two epicondyles. Right here, this is an epicondyle, and this is the epicondyle. How to differentiate between them? This is the medial epicondyle. Remember, the head will guide us toward the medial aspect of the bone. That is the medial epicondyle, and this is the lateral epicondyle. Let's go over the two fossa right here. One fossa is medially, and one fossa is away from the head, that is lateral fossa. Notice the difference in size between the two fossa. The bigger fossa is the coronoid fossa, which is the medial one. That's the medial epicondyle. The lateral fossa, the smaller one, is the radial fossa. Remember, the radius is the lateral bone in your forearm in the anatomical position. That's why when you flex your elbow, the radial fossa will receive the head of the radius. That's why it is called the radial fossa. When you flex your elbow, the coronoid fossa will receive the coronoid process of the ulna, which is the medial bone of the forearm. And as we said, this is the lateral epicondyle. Now let's go over these two structures right here. One structure is opposite to the head. This right here is the capitulum. So this is the capitulum. Next to the capitulum, we have the trochlea right here. So this process is the trochlea. Let's repeat the structures one more time on the anterior aspect. This is the medial epicondyle. This is the lateral epicondyle. This is the coronoid fossa. That is the radial fossa. This is the trochlea. And this is the capitulum. Now let's move to the posterior surface of the humerus. On the shaft, we can see the deltoid tuberosity. On the distal end of the humerus, we have one fossa. This fossa is the olecranon fossa. A way to remember that, the word olecranon starts with an O, and this looks like an O. The olecranon fossa is on the posterior surface. You have two O's in the word posterior. The olecranon fossa receives the olecranon process of the ulna when we flex the elbow. I hope you found the video helpful. Feel free to check my video on the anatomy of the radius and the ulna to understand their structure and how they articulate with the humerus.